5 bold predictions for week 14 of the fantasy football season. Let's get right into it. And we head out to Buffalo for bold prediction number 1. We're going to say the Buffalo Bills remind us who the Bengals defense really is. So we'll just start here by taking a good old pot shot at the Baltimore Ravens. What the hell was that on Thanksgiving night? How does Derrick Henry carry the ball 10 times in that game? How do you have an 18-play stretch in the first half where you're struggling on offense and Derrick Henry touches it once during that span? This is the Bengals, the Cincinnati Bengals, the worst defense by DVOA since the mid-70s. Sure, it feels like Cincy has made some strides defensively over the last few weeks, but when you're giving up like 350 yards and that goes down as a major improvement, it's not saying a whole lot. I know the return of Joe Burrow, it's an emotional boost for Cincinnati. It makes them more dangerous on offense, but I'm still not buying in that this defense has turned some sort of corner late in the season. I think they ran into a Ravens team that's completely lost right now on offense, a team that turned it over 5 times against a defense that had forced 10 turnovers in its first 11 games. That's not to say the Bills are completely rolling right now in their own right. They scored 3 points in the first half last week against Pittsburgh. They've turned it over 11 times in their last 4 games, but the Bills did what the Ravens couldn't last week. They adjusted, they figured out against a bad Steelers defense what they could do in the second half, and that was pounding James Cook and the running game. The Bengals struggle in all areas on defense, but the run defense has been particularly problematic this season. You think back to the Bears running for 283, the New York Jets running for 254. On balance, they've allowed at least 100 yards on the ground to everyone except the Cleveland Browns all the way back in week 1. I think we get another heavy dose of James Cook this week. We mix in some Ray Davis. We see Josh Allen carrying the ball. James Cook goes for at least 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. We'll say Cook has a monster day. The Bills put up 40 on the Bengals in what should be one of the shootouts of the week. Bold prediction number 2, Devon Achane. We're going to say he goes for 30-plus fantasy points on the Jets this week. He helps push you into the fantasy playoffs. It's the game everyone has circled on Sunday. Dolphins, Jets. Both these teams, in a roundabout way, kind of feeling themselves right now. Jets are 3-2 straight up in their last 5. They've covered all 5 of those games, coming off a win over the Falcons. Dolphins, meanwhile, have quietly won 3 in a row and 4 of their last 5. We're going to focus in on Achane, though, who currently sits as the RB5 on the year in full PPR. Hasn't dipped below 12.8 fantasy points in any game this season. Regardless of game script, Achane continues to be just a usage monster every single week. He ranks behind only Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson in total touches on the season. He's carried 22, 21, and 22 times over the last 3 games, ripping off 3 straight 120-plus yard performances. Didn't even have a single catch last week against New Orleans, but prior to that, had at least 5 catches in 4 straight games. Long story short, I think that continues this week in what should be a competitive game for both of these teams. Despite playing better of late, the Jets remain an excellent matchup against running backs. They're giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs on a ton of volume. They're giving up over 6 yards per reception to the running back position. Just gave up 193 from scrimmage to Bijan, another 55 to Tyler Algier. Both backs found the end zone in that game. We saw Travion Henderson put up 30-plus fantasy points against them. Chase Brown, Javonte Williams, James Cook have all gone off against the Jets. I think we get a heavy dose of Devon Achane and more of Achane as a receiver in this matchup. We didn't do a whole lot in that regard when these teams played back in week 4. We'll say Achane carries the Dolphins to a 4th straight win with his second 30-plus point fantasy game of the season. All right, next up, we will keep this optimistic theme going. Emeka Egbuka. We're going to say he breaks out of his slump against the Saints this weekend. I will fully admit there is plenty of wish casting at play here. I absolutely need Egbuka to have a big week in some of my most important leagues. On the season, he's still wide receiver 11 in full PPR. He's having a great rookie year, but the numbers have really fallen off over the last month and a half. Over his first 5 games, he was averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. He was wide receiver 3, behind only Puka Nacua and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Since then, and we're talking 7 full games at this point, he's averaging just 9.7 fantasy points per game. That puts him outside the top 40 among wide receivers in total production. He's really only had 1 splash game in that span. That was week 10. But outside of that, he hasn't even hit double digits in any of those other 6 games. Ironically, Egbuka is drawing more targets over the last 7 weeks than he was in those first 5 weeks, but he's been significantly less efficient on those targets, bringing in just 3.9 catches per game on about 9 targets. He also only has 1 touchdown in that span. That came in that week 10 game against New England. He had 5 touchdowns, of course, in his first 5 games. Maybe it's a rookie wall. Maybe it's a tougher stretch of schedule. I don't know, but even with how he's performed of late, I am still terrified to leave Emeka Egbuka on my bench this week. We know what he's capable of. Even with Chris Godwin coming alive next week, Mike Evans starting to get healthier, I think we get a much-needed bounce back from Egbuka this week against New Orleans. Saints ranked 26th in yards per target allowed to receivers, 25th in catch rate, 20th in EPA per pass on defense. Saints run defense actually grades out as one of the best in the NFL, so I think this is a spot where the Bucs do have to lean on that passing game just in time to push you into the fantasy playoffs. We'll say Emeka Egbuka puts up only his second 20-point fantasy week since week 5. Bold prediction number 4, Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to say he has a 20-plus fantasy point day against the Denver Broncos. Raiders are currently sitting at 2-10. Another ugly loss last week to the Chargers. This has just not been a fantasy-friendly team, really outside of Brock Bowers, who accounted for both touchdowns last week. Now the Raiders, they return home. They play host to the Broncos. On paper, one of the worst matchups of the week against an elite Broncos defense. These teams, of course, did play in Denver about a month ago. It was a 10-7 slot fest. Raiders only had 188 yards of total offense. They do have a new offensive coordinator. I'm not sure if that really matters. It didn't really look any different last week against the Chargers. But the one thing the Raiders do have going for them is Brock Bowers. He's a matchup nightmare for everyone, even the Denver Broncos. Denver was able to limit him to just 1 catch on 3 targets in that first matchup. But we just saw Zach Ertz go 10 for 106 against that defense. Travis Kelce went 9 for 91 and a touchdown against the Broncos. I know it's a matchup you'd usually want to run from, but we'll say the Raiders get their act together offensively. They're able to protect Geno Smith just enough to give him time to generate some looks down the field. We will say Brock Bowers bounces back from that terrible first game against Denver. He puts up at least 20 fantasy points for the second straight game and for only the 3rd time this season. Our 5th and final bold prediction this week, we're sticking with the tight end position. Tyler Warren, Brenton Strange, we're going to say they combine for 40-plus fantasy points in Colts-Jags. I need to do something with this game. I am, in fact, a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. This is their biggest regular season game in a while. Realistically, maybe the Monday night game against Kansas City earlier this season, but that was early enough in the schedule that the stakes feel a lot higher now. I do think this could be more of a defensive matchup overall. Jags defense is playing at a really high level. Colts struggles to me have been more on the offensive side than the defensive side. But what we do have here is 2 really good tight ends in Warren and Strange. Warren, of course, top 5 option at the position this season. Brenton Strange, not in that category yet, but he's a huge piece of this Jags offense, and when healthy, makes a massive difference week to week. He, of course, missed a chunk of time. He was on IR with a hip injury. He now has 2 top 7 weeks since coming back. Both of these defenses have really struggled against tight ends for most of the season. Jags ranked 2nd, behind only Cincinnati in fantasy points per game given up to tight ends. Colts ranked 29th in that category. Unsurprisingly, they're both top 5 in targets, catches, and yards given up to tight ends. So it's not like there's just an inordinate amount of touchdown production. Even with a hobbled Daniel Jones, even if we get some rain down in Duval, even if Trevor Lawrence is throwing 3 interceptions on Sunday, I think we get big games from both Tyler Warren and Brenton Strange. We'll say they combine for at least 40 fantasy points in a game that could decide the AFC South.